Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. If you see a deer with a hanging eye, I suggest you just walk on by. When I first saw the deer, it was a beautiful summer morning. I wasn't surprised by it at first. It's not exactly shocking to see deer on a hiking trail. That was until she turned her face. The doe's eyeball was dangling down, barely attached by muscle and nerve tissue. The sight of it made me stop in my tracks. My first instinct was to call animal control, but I knew I would be laughed at for suggesting they help wildlife. My next thought was to put the poor thing out of her misery. However, I didn't have a deer license, and this area was too populated to risk shooting in. So I stood there transfixed, listening to the doe's labored breaths, heartbroken at my inability to help. Eventually, the deer staggered away. I thought that would be the end of that. It was an awful sight to see, but the brutality of nature is a part of life. Unfortunately for me, I was about to understand this on a whole new level. It started with an increase of birds around my house. Their chatter woke me at the crack of dawn every single day. Annoying, but dismissible. Then the mice came. I cleaned my house from top to bottom. I searched endlessly for what was attracting them. I even hired an exterminator. Despite all this, they just kept coming and coming. They destroyed my kitchen, my clothes, and even my bed. Not that I had been sleeping in it much. On the first night of their arrival, I woke up to mice crawling on my face. Next came the deer tracks around my bedroom window and back door. I almost didn't notice them, thanks to how distracted I was with the mice. Though when I did, I immediately knew something was wrong. See, it's not unusual for deer to raid people's garden or yards. But when they do, they wander a bit, or at least make a beeline for the food. These tracks went directly from the woods, to the window, to the door, and then back to the woods again. In my sleep-deprived state, I might have been able to cobble together a normal reason why it happened, if not for the depth of the tracks. They were made by something much heavier than a deer possibly could be. That was the final straw. I asked my cousin if I could crash at his place until I got my house in order. He agreed, but I had to stay one more night to pack and board up my house. I know, dumb move. But you got to understand, this little house was my grandmother's before she died. I couldn't bear to leave it unprotected. I was so close to being done. All that was left was to lock the front door. My truck keys were in one hand. My other hand was on the knob when I heard a bang and then a screeching sound, as if something heavy was being dragged down the door. I had had enough. I was being driven out of the house I was raised in. I would not be pushed any farther. So I grabbed my rifle and threw the door open, hoping to catch whatever the hell was out there by surprise. The deer with the hanging eye was waiting for me. I wish I could say that my plan worked, but it happened so fast that I didn't even have time to pull the trigger. A flash of movement and then a stab of pain in my left eye. Before I passed out, I saw double. When I woke up, I was in a hospital with an eye patch. I was surrounded by very confused and worried relatives, doctors, and nurses asking how I lost my eye. I lied and said I didn't remember. What the hell else could I say? Unless you want to end up like me, I suggest you take my advice. If you see a deer in the woods, look down and keep on walking. There are things in there looking for you, even if you aren't looking for them. And trust me, they have no qualms about pulling at your heartstrings. Second story. I never believed my dad's stories about the deer skinner. Then I brought my kids to the lake. I never believed my dad. He's the kind of guy that is constantly poking or scaring or finding a way to get the kids going. Growing up, we spent summers camping in northern Wisconsin. Eventually, my parents settled on their favorite lake and bought property. Throughout all those camping trips, Dad always messed with his sons. As my brother and I looked up at the stars at night, he would tell us he is from Mars and was waiting to get home. Or he would tell us that he had to chase off a grizzly bear last night because it was about to attack us. Anything to scare us a bit. But there was one story that always stuck with me. The story of the deer Skinner. Just off the road, there was a dirt road, hidden behind overgrown bushes. About a quarter-mile down the road sits an old shed on a hill. The front yard was filled with overgrown grass and burned-out cars. Not an unusual thing for northern Wisconsin, except for one vehicle. A school bus. Dad warned us of the man that lived there, the deer Skinner. In Wisconsin, hunting is a huge part of the culture. The one thing they don't tell you about hunting is what it takes to process a deer. Peeling back the fur, slicing fat away from the muscles, sawing legs off. It's an exhausting, bloody ordeal. This man on the hill was a deer Skinner. You drop off your big buck, and he'll take care of processing the deer, taking off its pajamas, as he described it. You give him $75 bucks in a few days and come back to a cooler filled with venison. But the story of the deer Skinner isn't about a man living off the land with a side gig. It was a warning about what he did in the off-season. On rainy nights in the campground, Dad would whisper stories of the deer Skinner, a man who sits alone, waiting until hunting season, overcome by desire when summer comes around and the campground is full. He would take children from the campground and they'd go missing. He'd return to his house on the hill and process the children, then dump their bones into the lake. I try not to think about the school bus that sits in his yard. Dad would always take his stories a bit too far, and Mom would scold him. With a chuckle or two, he'd sip his beer and tell her that he was just warning the kids. Stay close to the camper after dark. I always chalked Dad's stories up to just scaring his kids around the campfire. I never believed in the deer Skinner. Then I bought my kids to the lake. Life comes at you fast. I graduated from high school, went to college, got engaged, married, and suddenly have 2 kids of my own. My parents bought land on the lake, built a house, and moved there full-time. Now, our out-of-state license plates cruise through northern Wisconsin. As the 4-lane highway turned into a 2-lane, then to a county road, and finally a dirt path barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to squeak past, I look in the rearview mirror. My sons watch the tall trees zip past in the window until we come upon the road with the overgrown bushes. I look down the familiar side road. That's where the Skinner lives, I say, smirking and echoing my father. My wife, Penny, shoots me a glare. Lane is barely 10, but sharp like his mother. Jacob, my older son, wears headphones, continuing to ignore us as he had for the last 5 hours. Typical 13-year-old. Who's the Skinner? Lane replies. Nobody. Penny shoots back before I have a chance to scar them. We curve around a bend and the bushes fade away. A few miles later, we reach the end of the road and pull onto the thin gravel driveway. Our SUV rolls down the driveway, past the garage, and finally stops. We made it, Penny announces. I unbuckle my seatbelt and the 4 of us climb out. Finally here. I stare up at my parents' home. Long gone are the days of the flat-tire camper. The mice-ridden trailer had to be dragged out on its axles. It's since been replaced by a small, 3-bedroom A-frame. Lane runs down the hill first, a pillow wrapped in his arms. He skips right past the colorfully painted rocks that I painted when I was his age. A painted brown and green turtle looks up at me. Its smile faded from decades in the sun. I pry a reluctant Jacob from the car. We settle down after getting all the hugs and pleasantries out of the way. Dinner is a Wisconsin delicacy: bratwurst, beans, and watermelon. We immediately start joking and catching up. It feels great to be back with family, but I can't shake this feeling that Dad is distant. The sun sets, and we light a campfire. Penny and the kids work on s'mores. Dad and I put down a few beers. Mom sips whatever mystery beverage she keeps in her red cup. As I look out at the quiet lake, a loon wails. Fireflies dance in the night. The memories rush in. I look over at Dad. Whatever happened to the deer skinner? I snicker. Penny immediately looks up at me, her eyes speaking loud and clear. Don't you dare. What are you talking about? Dad replies, the story you used to tell us as kids. About the deer skinner? What's a deer skinner? Lane asks. Nothing. Your father is just being goofy. Penny interrupts. Watch your marshmallow. Lane's stick and marshmallow are engulfed in a flame. Give that here, Dad says. He blows out Lane's torch. Perfectly cooked. The charcoal marshmallow drips down the stick. You have to remember the deer skinner. You told us that story all the time as kids. Remember he lived in that shack on the hill. With the school bus, I say, not letting it go. Dad shrugs, looks off in the forest, and sips his beer. I think the place you remember burned down, he says, feeling distant as ever. I drop the conversation and go back to tending the fire. As the logs burn, the group shrinks. The kids head to bed first. Then Mom, followed shortly by Penny. As I adjust the fire, I look up at Dad. He stares into the flames. Everything okay? You're quiet, I ask him. A long pause. It feels like he's contemplating something. But instead, he stands, tosses his empty beer can on the ground, then finally makes eye contact with me. Keep those kids close. Don't let them wander into the woods. And he goes inside. I sit back down as a log rolls over, sending sparks into the sky. Is this just another way Dad is messing with me? The next morning, Penny and I are in the bathroom brushing our teeth. Penny spits into the sink. The fucking deer skinner? Are you kidding me? They are way too young to hear about that. I was half their age when Dad started telling me that story. Yeah, and look how you turned out. You don't want our kids turning out like me? I smile back. Penny glares, not amused. She tosses her toothbrush down, and that's the end of that conversation. Mom is already 2 coffees deep by the time I stumble into the living room. I pour myself a cup with a splash of milk. Lane and Penny are enjoying pancakes. I barely get it to my lips before, how about a hike?
Mom, I'm barely Ava.
Can we visit the campground? Lane asks. I want to visit the beach. The kids heard about the campground from when I was a kid, and we first started coming to the lake. If there's a place that hasn't changed, it's the campground. You even pump your own water from an old hand pump. I have to show you my trail. Mom says before I have a chance to answer. I've got the whole thing marked out. I look over at Jacob on the couch. He munches on his pancake with earbuds in. He didn't even hear the interaction. I go over to him and pull one out. We're going to the beach after lunch. Have fun, Jacob snarks. You don't want to come with? Nope. He slides his earbud back in. I shrug. After breakfast, Penny, Lane, Mom, and head to the campground. We walk down the road and head toward my mom's trailhead. Lane and Penny are up ahead. Lane's bright red backpack bobbles as we walk down the road. The Rupert family finally sold that plot. They got $315 for it, if you can believe that. Can't imagine what that puts our house at. Place is changing, I reply. Bit different than when you were a kid, right? She smiles back. Still has the same charm, though. We take a few more steps when I can't help but ask, "So what was the deal with Dad last night?" "I don't know what you mean." Mom looks over at me. Her eyes beg me not to pry any further. "There it is." Lane yells as he spots one of Mom's trail markers. "You found it," she yells back. "I hung these on the path to the campground. Makes it easy to follow here and back." Mom tells him. I kneel next to Lane. "If you get lost in the woods, just look for the ribbons and they will lead you right back." Lane smiles and runs ahead. Penny does her best to keep up with him. "Looks like he's got some northern Wisconsin in him," Mom says with a smile. Then the four of us enter the woods. The hike mostly open forest. The lake is just down the hill. We crunch through fallen leaves. Birds sing to us as we cross the forest. I watch Lane hop over a fallen tree. He seems to be enjoying the adventures of the forest. It's about a half-mile hike to the campground. We're about halfway there when we hear a crunch in the woods. We both stop and look. A deer. A doe to be exact. Broadside. We lock eyes and I stare at her. A moment passes when I hear another crunch. Behind the doe stands a fawn, still with its spots. It takes a few more steps, lifting its legs a bit too high, clearly still learning how to use its body. Penny and Lane look at the deer ahead of us. "We've seen her a few times," Mom whispers. "Normally she has 2 babies with her. I hope something didn't happen to the other one. They tend to show back up," I reply. And just like that, the deer is spooked. It darts deeper into the forest. The fawn does its best to keep pace. A few seconds later, they're both gone. We enter the campground through an empty campsite. It's the end of June, so the campground should fill up with 4th of July campers soon. We step onto the gravel road and walk down the middle of the street, waving to a middle-aged couple as we pass. Lane turns around and runs up to Penny, whispers something in her ear. Penny looks at Mom. "Bathroom?" I smile. "Just up ahead around the corner there's an outhouse." "Really?" Lane looks back at me with a big smile. "Go ahead, we'll catch up." Lane runs up ahead and out of sight. He's a good kid. Mom says, "Reminds me of you." "Yeah, I was less of a little shit though," I reply. No, you weren't," she says back, making Penny laugh. We round the corner and find the outhouse. The casual talk continues as we wait for Lane to finish. Mom points out the different campsites we used to stay in, then shares an embarrassing story of when my little brother ran through the campground naked. As the laughter subsides, the 3 of us realize something doesn't feel quite right. "You okay in there?" I ask. No response. I wait another minute or so. "Lane, you all right, bud?" Still nothing. I look back at Penny and Mom, both confused. I walk up to the outhouse and tug on the door. Empty. "He's not here." "What?" Penny asks. "He's not here." "Lane," Penny calls out, checking around the outhouse. "Lane, where are you?" She whips the door open again, assuming that maybe I missed him in the 5-foot-wide outhouse. "Where is he?" I shake my head. I dunno. We spend the next hour searching around the campground, asking anyone that's there if they've seen him. I try to remember his outfit. I can get the blue shirt, but was it a Packers hat or Bucks hat? The red backpack. I remember the red backpack. It's late afternoon now. Our voices have gone hoarse. Everyone in the campground knows who we are and is likely sick of hearing us yell. We've exhausted the campground. He isn't here. We head back through the woods, following the same marked path. Maybe he followed the path back? Penny says, hoping for the best. Maybe is all I can bring myself to reply. We get back to the house and go up to the garage. "Where's Lane?" Dad asks. Penny wipes some tears away. Mom heads inside. "He disappeared." I say. What do you mean disappeared? We got to the campground. He ran ahead to use the bathroom, and then he was gone. Dad stares at me, knowing more than he wants to say. He looks off at the forest for a moment, then stands. I'm going to call the police, Penny says. She goes into the house. I wipe my forehead and take a deep breath. I should help, I say, turning away from Dad. Get in the truck, he replies. I turn back toward him. He snatches his keys from the workbench. Dad and I drive in silence. He turns down a side road that I'm not too familiar with. Where are we going? I ask. Dad says nothing. The asphalt fades into gravel. The truck spits up a cloud of dust behind us, so think you can't see something coming if you tried. Then I see the overgrown bushes. The truck slows. Dad turns down the road. The tree canopy covers the road. Sunlight flickers in between the leaves. It feels as if we're driving in a tunnel. Eventually, the forest gives way to a field. I look up and notice a late afternoon storm is rolling in. Then, the truck eases to a stop. He looks up a grassy hill. At the top, a wooden shack sits. The familiar bus is in the background. This is the Skinner's place. I thought you said it burned down, I say. Dad takes a moment, stares at the school bus and the rebuilt shed. It did, because I burned it down. The moment lingers. My dad not only committed arson for some reason, but the building he burned down is back. We stare at the shed for a moment, when my dad reaches into the center console and pulls out his handgun. Get the shotgun from the back? What are we doing? I reply, getting your son back. My dad climbs from the truck. I hesitate. Dad? He looks up at me while pulling the shotgun from the back. Yeah, he says while loading shells into the gun. CLA chink. CLA chink. I don't know if this is a good idea. Then stay here. He closes the door and starts up the hill. After a moment of hesitation, I realize I really don't have a choice and I follow him. It doesn't take long for us to get up the hill. At the top, the small house somehow feels even smaller. Let's go around the back, Dad whispers. See if we can see anything. He crouches down and we dip below the dark window. Dad, I don't think anyone is here. He's here. My dad nods inside. I peek into the window, stare long enough to see the movement of a figure pass in front of a doorway. I dip back down. Did he see me? I look back in the direction of my dad, but he's already gone. Dad? I whisper. No response. Dad, where are you? Then I hear a crunch around back. I rush toward the sound and hook around the corner of the building. No Dad, but the back door is open. I creep toward the doorway and poke my head in. The first thing that hits me is the smell. Dead and rotting flesh. It burns my nostrils, and I instinctively pull my shirt over my mouth. I haven't eaten all day, so don't have to worry about losing my lunch. I step into the house and find myself inside of a disheveled breezeway. Poorly mounted deer heads hang on the wall. I glaze past it, but find something truly disturbing. Along the far wall, a bloody workbench. A deer leg lays half-skinned, a handsaw sliced into its ankle. I try not to think about what else has been cut up on that workbench. I inch through the doorway into what I think is the kitchen. Dad? I yell again in a loud, raspy whisper. Still nothing. The kitchen, if you can call it that, went through the destruction phase of a renovation, but never went any further. If Dad burned this place down 10 years ago, it sure doesn't look like it was rebuilt recently. I round another corner and find my dad standing over a thin, bearded man. The Skinner. My dad holds the pistol to his head. Where is my grandson? Dad, what are you? He cuts me off before I can finish. This man took your son. I look down at the man on his knees. He's frail, not one that could easily abduct a kid. He looks more than just old, likely sick. Blood pours from his nose. I don't know what you're talking about, the Skinner replies. Please, please don't shoot me. Then tell me where he is. My dad yells back. Dad, we should go. My dad looks up at me, fire in his eyes. We look at each other for a moment, then my dad lowers his gun. As my dad lowers his gun, I think I've convinced him to finally leave. The frail man lifts his finger and points at the door. Downstairs. I look up at my dad. We're both thinking the same thing. Go downstairs, my dad says. I'll stay here. I gave him one more look. You sure? He nods. I inch away from the confrontation and toward the staircase. Downstairs is much like the above. An utter, cluttered mess. A single bulb illuminates the basement. On the other end of the room, a red steel door. I walk toward it, take a deep breath, and put my hand on the handle. As I push the door open, a giant mounted deer head stares at me. Small candles flicker in place of where their eyeballs should be. Its 12 pointed horns cast giant shadows up the wall. It's some sort of shrine. I look around the rest of the room. Other deer artifacts. Hooves. Fur. More horns. The room isn't cluttered or disgusting. It's designed. I look around the room, taking in the details, but that's when I notice it. The red backpack. Lane's red backpack. It sits under the giant deer head. I lean down and wrap my fingers around the backpack strap. It's Lane's. I rush back upstairs. Dad still stands over the deer Skinner. I show Dad the backpack. He killed him. I yell. He's dead. Without hesitation, I shove my dad back and pull the shotgun to my shoulder. Anger has completely taken over. The Skinner quakes. He knows what's coming next. The man utters. But I don't give him a chance to finish. I pull the trigger. A few minutes later, my dad and I sit back in the truck. We watch the flames burn. The Skinner's house slowly turning to ash. We'll never speak of this again, my dad quietly says. I nod. As my dad puts the truck into drive, my phone rings. Penny. Hello. He's home, she says. Lane's back. Third story. In the chilling forests of Canada, where the snow whispers secrets and the wind carries tales of ancient terror, there lurks a creature of nightmare, the Wendigo. Deep in the heart of the Canadian wilderness, where the trees stand tall and the silence is thick, a group of friends embarked on a winter camping trip. They ventured into the woods, their laughter echoing against the evergreen giants. Little did they know, they were trespassing into the domain of the Wendigo, a creature hungry for human flesh and driven by insatiable greed. As night fell and the temperature dropped, a sense of unease settled over the campsite. Strange noises echoed through the trees, and shadows danced in the flickering firelight. Despite their growing fear, the friends huddled together, seeking solace in each other's company. But as the night wore on, their sense of security shattered. One by one, they began to disappear into the darkness, dragged away by an unseen force. Panic gripped the remaining survivors as they realized they were being hunted by something far more sinister than any natural predator. With each passing moment, the Wendigo grew stronger, feeding on the fear and desperation of its prey. Its icy breath chilled the air, and its haunting cries echoed through the forest, driving the survivors to the brink of madness. As dawn broke, only one of the friends remained, the sole witness to the horror that had unfolded in the depths of the Canadian wilderness. With trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, they stumbled out of the forest, haunted by the memories of their friends' screams and the relentless pursuit of the Wendigo. To this day, The tale of the Wendigo serves as a cautionary reminder to those who dare to venture too deep into the wilds of Canada. For in the darkness of the forest, something ancient and hungry waits to claim its next victim. Fourth story. In the vast and rugged terrain of the Great Lakes region, where the forests stretch for miles and the lakes whisper ancient secrets, there exists a tale that sends shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned hunters, the legend of the Wendigo. It was late autumn, and a group of friends had gathered for their annual hunting trip deep in the heart of the wilderness. Among them was Jack, a seasoned hunter with years of experience tracking game through the dense woods. Despite warnings from the locals about the dangers lurking in the wilderness, Jack and his friends brushed them off, confident in their skills and armed with rifles. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and the trees loomed taller, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the fading light. But Jack paid no heed to the ominous atmosphere, his focus fixed on the thrill of the hunt. As night fell, they set up camp near a remote lake, their laughter mingling with the crackling of the fire. But their merriment was short-lived, for as darkness enveloped the forest, an eerie silence descended, broken only by the distant howl of a lone wolf. Unbeknownst to them, they had trespassed into the territory of the Wendigo, a creature of legend said to be born from the depths of winter's despair. With each passing moment, the creature's presence grew stronger, its hunger driving it to seek out prey to sate its insatiable appetite. As the hunters slept, Jack was awoken by a faint rustling outside the tent. Grabbing his rifle, he ventured into the darkness, his senses on high alert. But what he encountered was beyond anything he could have imagined. A towering figure with eyes like glowing embers, its gaunt frame draped in tattered fur. Frozen with fear, Jack watched as the Wendigo prowled through the camp, its unearthly howls sending shivers down his spine. With a sudden burst of speed, it lunged towards one of his friends, its claws gleaming in the moonlight. In a desperate bid to save his friend, Jack raised his rifle and fired, the sound echoing through the forest like a thunderclap. But the Wendigo was relentless, shrugging off the bullets as if they were nothing more than insect bites. As the night wore on, the hunters found themselves locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Wendigo, their fear mounting with each passing moment. With every step they took, the creature seemed to draw closer, its presence suffocating them like a shroud of darkness. But just as all hope seemed lost, Jack remembered an old legend he had heard as a child, a tale of a sacred herb said to ward off evil spirits. With nothing left to lose, he set out into the forest, determined to find the herb and banish the Wendigo once and for all. Through the darkest depths of the wilderness he ventured, his heart pounding with every step, and finally, as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, he found what he had been searching for, a small patch of the herb, its delicate leaves shimmering with a faint blue glow. With trembling hands, Jack gathered the herb and returned to camp, where his friends lay huddled together, their faces pale with terror. As he placed the herb into the fire, a wave of relief washed over them, and they watched in awe as the flames flickered and danced, casting shadows that seemed to ward off the darkness. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the Wendigo vanished into the depths of the forest, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of dread. From that day forth, Jack and his friends never spoke of the horrors they had witnessed in the Great Lakes region. But deep down, they knew that the legend of the Wendigo would forever haunt their memories, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the deepest recesses of the wilderness. Fifth story. I think something is wrong with the deer. For all of my life, nature has surrounded every corner of where I lived. My backyard had a clear view of trees surrounding around my childhood house. You can hear many things in those woods, and it's where many animals had lived there. Animals many of you are pretty familiar with. Raccoons, birds, rabbits, groundhogs. But I came here to talk about one animal that I'm now very concerned about: the deer. Deers are one of the many animals that my town used for hunting, whether for their heads to be used for decorating as a reward to catching them, or skinning them after they were killed and used for meat to eat. I remember being younger and thinking how horrible and disgusting the taste must be. But after trying some myself, the taste is incredible, and I have to say, it's my favorite type to eat for sausage. But sometimes, these mammals can be tedious. You probably know what I'm talking about. Deer being on the road. I remember many times when one or two would run across them to get to the other side. Me and my family, when driving, would like to count how many there were when we went out. The most was 11. But that's not the reason I'm writing this. But it does connect to what I witnessed today. Earlier, I was driving from the grocery store with some items for tonight. Dad's making a good meal. Breakfast for dinner. But anyway, I was driving as usual, though a little nervous since I just started to drive without supervision 2 months ago, when suddenly, a deer was making its way through, and I stopped slowly so I could let it pass. But I noticed something was odd. I couldn't see as well due to it being nighttime, so I might be imagining what I saw at first, but the headlights of the truck gave me a clear view. It was a doe. We never usually see bucks out here, and it was slowly walking. Here's the thing about deers. Deers would make a bolt to the other side and run as fast as they can away from the road. However, this one has taken its time, but I didn't mind at first. In fact, I didn't notice how odd it was until later. But then something caught my eye. It looked like it was shaking, or maybe it was twitching. I can't be sure, but it was freaky. I also noticed how something was dripping out its mouth. Again, it was dark, but I swear the substance looked black, and it was dripping slowly like a dog eagerly waiting for a treat. That's when I got a little nervous and felt pity. Maybe it got hit by another car and it was hurt? It seemed logical, until it slumped to the ground head first. I jumped in my seat a little when it did that. It just fell to the road so quickly. Was it dying? Did it finally succumb to its injuries? Honestly, I wasn't too happy if a deer was going to die right in front of me on my way home. But now, I kinda wished it did, because it got right back up again. Slowly, at first. Its legs wobbled as it slowly tried to stand up like a newborn fawn. But the part that concerned me the most was the head was still slumped. And I mean it. The whole head and neck was the body was still slouched over, and it was looking upside down at me. I could feel chills running down my spine as it stared straight at me like I was the headlights. I didn't move, and we were stuck staring at each other for God knows how long. The dark substance was now dripping down its face from its mouth to the ground in a puddle. That's when I realized it was blood, and I could swear in its black eyes I saw something moving inside of it. Then it began to walk, still wobbling its legs and the head still upside down, and into the woods on the other side. I remember just staying there in the road trying to make sense of what I just saw. That's not normal. Not at all. But who would believe me? My family would think I made the whole thing up and laugh it off. It's not like I have video footage or pictures taken when I encounter this doe. Or can I still call it that? So I came here to get some answers. Maybe hearing this from others would make more sense. At first, I wasn't going to and just keep this to myself. But earlier this night, I heard a family friend talking about his latest hunt. How he found a buck laying on the ground just twitching and bleeding. How a large hole in its stomach was there, like something busted out. All I know is this. I'm going to skip eating deer sausage for a while. 6th story. I met a child. I never imagined he would be one of the black-eyed kids. In the last few days, me and my significant other, Magnus, have experienced some peculiar oddities. After stopping at a shopping center, one of the rear doors of our parked car was found wide open upon returning with the cart to the parking lot, despite being double-checked by him as he always did after locking it with the remote. Thankfully, with the car looking as average as a grocery-running vehicle can get, and never leaving things of value where it is easily seen, there's little temptation for it to be broken into by would-be thieves. For 2 nights in a row this past week, our normally composed and quiet dogs that don't howl or bark at every little falling leaf were acting strangely and excessively agitated. They bayed and growled in the dead of night with no particular reason at all. There was no thunder, nor earthquake, not even a wild animal that strayed from the nearby forest into our street. While strolling around on the main street near the edge of the forest with our 2 dogs, a Rottweiler named Fenrir and a smaller fox terrier mix named Foxy, we were stopped dead in our tracks by a police van that came speeding from the more densely populated parts with the emergency lights flashing. The driver briefly halted the vehicle to order us home at once for our own safety, as a bear was thought roaming the area. Encountering wild animals like deer and bears was nothing unusual. Given the location of the village and heeding the warning, we promptly made our way back to our house. I found it slightly peculiar that there was no emergency alert on the phones, no posts about it on the village's Facebook group, even though these were the ordinary things whenever a situation was at hand, especially when some neighbors are eager to see a bear from afar whenever possible. Our next-door friend's 2 kittens, both 1 week old, went missing despite the garage, in which they were in, being locked and him mostly approaching through the door connecting to the house. He had looked everywhere without luck. They were gone, and even their mother cat's endless meowing was to no avail. Today afternoon, the neighbor with the cat called, his voice almost breaking as he explained in what gruesome state he had found some carcasses what he believed to belong to his kittens. Such horrid mutilations only in horror films had he seen. But what was even stranger was the fact that the wounds didn't seem to be animal-inflicted. No teeth nor claw marks, yet the skin and flesh were ripped off of shattered bones. Magnus and I recalled the other nights when our dogs barked uncontrollably with no apparent cause, be it wild or stray animals on the streets. Together with the rest of the canines from other families, they made those nights quite unpleasant. The amount of these strange and disturbing experiences was beginning to show its toll. As a distraction, I went to browse the Reddit pages and started reading up on stories from /unexplained mysteries. However counterintuitive, it was the only thing that intrigued me enough at troublesome times. During me casually scrolling almost absent-minded, my eyes had caught a headline about black-eyed kids from 22 days ago. I opened it to read it later, as my love's stomach had begun signaling the time for supper. I was about to descend the stairs, with Magnus right behind me, when the dog started barking again. We ran down and looked outside. Twilight had already fallen, but the last shimmer of sunlight still made it so that no flashlight was necessary to see our pets, our parked car, but nothing else that was out of the ordinary. Not even in the general direction they were facing. We calmed them down, then we headed back into the kitchen. As if on cue, the bell rang. Magnus opened the door, but found the porch empty, but as he peered into the distance, he spotted the rear door from the car wide open again, the same door that only minutes ago we saw through the window shut. He cautiously walked up to the vehicle, inspecting it from a distance, being prepared for a potential surprise attack. But aside from the eerie quiet, nothing was there to be found. The car was empty and untouched, with no scratches or marks aside the known ones, and no broken glass. He wanted to lock it once more, but as he closed the door, the automatic lock sprung and it was no longer yielding to open without the remote control. He shut the main door, leaving the key in the keyhole, and somewhat stressed from the whole thing, he headed straight towards me, thinking out loud about the car being a bad deal after all. But he stopped abruptly, as a fragile, soft voice behind him said, "Thanks for letting me in." We exchanged a worried look as we noticed a small child behind him, with brown hair, clean, nice clothes, and head slightly bent down. "Except we didn't," stated Magnus as he was preparing to walk back to the door with the intent of banishing the kid from our house when this one responded almost immediately, "But you did. You left the door open for me when you went to check the car. I was there to your left." The child's voice seemed to transition almost instantly from close to crying to an uncanny calmness. "Okay, slow down. Who are you and where are your parents? I don't recall seeing you in this neighborhood." My love questioned him as we both felt that something was very off. "I am Leslie. My mother and father are far away," the little one replied, and I couldn't help but think that he was quite cryptic for one so young. "So you are lost? Do you know the phone number of your parents?" he asked, to which the only response was a brief shake of the head. "Right, I will call the police. I am sure they can help in a situation like this," I said, starting to lose some of my composure. As I was ready to dial 112, I realized that somehow the phone was not connecting despite not even needing a service provider to make the call. I freaked out, as I was well aware that the phone was near enough to a signal tower to send and receive emergency dials. Witnessing my struggling, Magnus tried the same on his handheld device, but to no avail. I let him and the kid stay put as I ran upstairs to my still-running computer, only to find the network on it down. I checked the router, but it showed no signs of defects. I restarted the small device, pulled it, then plugged it back into the socket, and despite showing normal operation, no signal was found on all the gadgets in the room. Electricity was not the problem, for the router seemingly functioned fine, and the bulb above my head was shining in its warm color. The phones were down, but I managed to reach the local police station on my laptop. I lied as I entered the hall where Magnus was watching over the child, whose pose was uncannily still. "You are not telling the truth. Why are you being deceitful?" the kid asked all of a sudden, tilting his head almost unnaturally to the side. "I didn't want for you to lose hope. We will find a way to reach out to your parents, okay?" I stated in desperation, asking for help from Magnus through an intense glare. To our relief, the child nodded, to which we lightened up a bit. That is, until Magnus perceived something macabre. Small beads of caked blood freckled the palm and the back of his hands, while under the fingernails were pieces of flesh, albeit barely visible, but noticeable if one was privy enough. "What's that on your hands?" he asked while examining the ominous clues just found. At first I was a bit clueless, and I was about to fetch some wet wipes when the kid said the most disturbing thing a child could possibly utter with an innocent smile. "Kitty blood," he blurted so matter-of-factly that we both froze in place. Upon hearing those two words from his little mouth, we both stared at him like he was not saying that for real, until, since his unexpected appearance, he finally looked me dead in the eyes. I wished he didn't, for his pair I will never forget, and not in a good way. The ocular globes of his turned from what were a normal white with a common bluish or greenish iris color to vantablack with no reflection from their surfaces. It felt like looking into humankind's deepest, foulest, lowest, wretched state. If it had not been for our dogs barking, I would have been forever trapped in that stare. I was sure of it. The sudden sound of their distressed state brought us back to our senses. "What in the devil's name? Get out, now!" Magnus shouted at the kid, who increasingly seemed to be something other than a human offspring, while trying to unlock the door but failing miserably, both because of his now agitated state and because the lock seemed to jam whenever he turned the key. I don't want to. Since you already let me in, I don't want to leave until I have played with your cats. I like little kittens. They're so fragile and flexible. The child stated again on a cold voice. Damn. In all this madness, I almost forgot about our two felines on the first floor. My heart started to beat even faster as I realized they were in danger too. Not to mention what could happen to us after the child was done with them and got bored. You shouldn't handle animals. Take a gander at your hands for the reason. I sternly looked at him, stating with a tone so sure even I was surprised by it. I just want to have friends. I am always alone. So alone. The kid's tone jumped rapidly from an angered shout to a saddened whimper in an instant during his reasoning, which again had both of us standing there with our feet rooted into the floor. A glimmer of hope seemed to have popped up. Maybe, just maybe if we could somehow play along and deal with his possible plight, we might just be able to coerce him to leave us in peace. Why are you so lonely? You said you have parents. Where are they? I asked with a caring tone. It was night, long drive from Auntie Ethel, and Daddy was sleepy. Pretty red lights above the road. Something hit us, and when I awoke, he and Mommy were stuck. They were crying and struggling, saying for me to be calm and get out. So I did what they wanted and opened the door for them. But they weren't moving. They were sleepy from the trip. I tried to wake them up, but they would not respond. I stayed so much there, by their side. A red car came and picked them up, leaving me behind despite my shouting at them. I wandered around until some days ago I saw the car once more. It looked like the one my parents had, only it was pretty and not bent. I opened the door and sneaked into the back seat. I thought they would come at last to take me home, but they never came. Why didn't they come? Instead, it was you who entered the car. Emotional waves emanated from the child, influencing ours, as if to make us experience what he had felt. Sadness. I stood frozen as my mind put the pieces of the past day's happenings together. Our car was locked, and the child was the one who opened it, most likely riding all the way home with us, where he must have seen some animals in the vicinity, with which he tried to curb his loneliness by playing with them. According to his story, the parents died in a crash, which meant that, with a dreadful realization, he was dead too. It explained his unnatural way of speaking and the nature of his eyes, and no wonder the dogs were freaking out. The poor thing just wanted some company in his lonely, undead world. Yet no living thing could survive his outbursts of rage. No wonder the police thought there was a bear nearby. Most likely the neighbors' kittens weren't the only animals mutilated. They are mad at me, I think. They were arguing about me again. I made them angry. It is all my fault. Auntie Ethel was kind, but she scared me. I didn't mean to do it. The child shared a few more vague information about the things that led to the unfortunate event. I saw he was hurting internally, and despite my sanity screaming to get as far away as I can, I tried to calm him, for he was only a kid after all, with a great loss. They were never angry with you. They loved you. They wanted to get you out of the car, of the danger. They couldn't move from their seats, and that is why they were shouting. They were desperately trying to make sure that at least you would be safe. I explained to the little one, kneeling down to be more on the same level. The child looked at me, and somehow in my words he found comfort. Some reasoning, I guess. The eyes slowly turned from black to one of hazel, as a small curvature appeared on his mouth. With that, the small figure started heading to the door. I can't open it, Magnus reminded the child. But I can. I was the one that held it shut. The kid smiled. As the door opened fully, we let out a sigh of relief as we followed him with our eyes as he passed through the doorstep, where he suddenly stopped and stared into the distance as if he saw something. My parents have come for me at least, the small one exclaimed in ecstasy, tapping his little feet with joy. Then he reached out to a hand for someone we could not see. The dog started barking like crazy again, something Magnus and I tried to stop, only for them to cease suddenly. When we looked back onto the porch in front of the doorway, the kid was gone and finally the dog seemed relaxed too. That was quite an experience, Magnus said as he placed his arms around me from behind. I am just glad the kid didn't hurt us or messed with our pets, I admitted, still trying to digest what had just happened. We both agreed that the dogs most likely had saved our lives, as we could not imagine a dead child in distress, with great loss and even greater self-hatred, just how much havoc and unimaginable evil things could have done to the animals and humans alike. I certainly need to change my entire view on the black-eyed kids' stories, I stated as I realized how many of these incidents, where lost and frightened dead children could be associated with malevolent beings from beyond the veil. I just hope we are not living in a surreal world, stated Magnus. My love, this is surreal world, I said as we headed once again into the kitchen. 7th story. I'm fairly sure my cat saved my life last night. Believe me, I feel ridiculous making that assertion. Cats aren't exactly known for heroically defending their owners. But I will swear on anything you like. I now owe my continued existence to my 13-pound furry gremlin. I just have the one cat, Bugsy, a rage-fueled, 4-year-old ginger tabby. Her average day consists of sleeping, biting my feet, and shitting in my bathroom sink. Not exactly the hero songs are made of, but I love her despite myself. After all, she is the only pet I have ever had, and I would slay legions for her. I go to bed around 11, and she generally runs up and down the hallway for about 30 minutes before coming and curling up next to me. Sometimes I swear she is trying to smother me by wallowing all over my face and sticking her whiskers up my nose. So I didn't find it remotely strange to feel 4 little paws hop onto my bed and walk across my chest. I could hear her purring and she circled on top of me. Eyes closed, I reached a hand out to pet her. My fingers were met with a disconcerting texture akin to the rough side of a kitchen sponge. Pulling my hand away, I could feel the purring rattling through my bones. My eyes flew open. Even in the dark, I could tell it wasn't Bugsy on my chest. The rough fur that covered this animal was blacker than the darkness surrounding it. It stood on long, slender legs that supported a skin-and-bones body. Its head was teardrop-shaped, with no visible nose, and eyes that were much too big. Massive, reflective orange eyes met mine. The purr deepened, a thumping bass radiating through my body. I stared, transfixed, into those luminous eyes. It blinked slowly, languidly. I realized I wasn't breathing and drew in a long, shuddering breath. It smiled. Hundreds of tiny teeth glowed in the scant light as the creature smiled, opening its mouth much further than it should have been able to. Hot air smelling of tar and smoke forced its way down to my lungs. The purr changed, gradually becoming higher-pitched until it sounded more like the whine of an airplane engine. I felt my eardrums pop agonizingly. I couldn't think, couldn't move. The all-consuming need was to keep staring deep into those eyes. Galaxies and nebulae spun behind those eyes. The inky depths of the oceans could be found in those eyes. Hot liquid was dripping out of my ears. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the eyes were gone. The weight was ripped from my chest, and the purring stopped abruptly as the animal flew, shrieking, against the wall. I saw a flash of orange as Bugsy tackled the thing. My hands flew up to cover my ears as the shrieking continued, joined by the hissing, spitting ferocity of Bugsy. Bugsy flew back with across the bed with a loud pop. Finally coming to my senses, I jumped out of bed and flicked the light switch. Bugsy paced back and forth, tail twitching, agitated, panicky. My eyes darted all over the room. The thing was nowhere in sight. I dropped to the floor and looked under the bed. Nothing. Bugsy licked at a scratch on her shoulder. I cautiously crawled across the bed to the far corner where the thing had last been. The only sign I could find of creature was a viscous green liquid on one of my pillows. Shaking, I pulled Bugsy to me, looking her over. Aside from a couple of scratches on her, she was fine. I hugged her tight as she glared at me. I haven't seen any indication of it coming back yet, but I can't bring myself to turn the light off or to let Bugsy leave my sight. I took her to the vet today to make sure nothing more was wrong. I had to tell him that she had gotten in a fight with another cat, but I didn't have a good explanation when he pulled a straight, black claw out of one of the cuts.